I'm Matt Egan, London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. Frank?
Sorry, yes, I'm Frank de Vocht from the University of Bristol.
Similar to before, we'll shoot through our bit as fast as we can and get to the more interesting bits, which are presentations by Katie Powell from Sheffield and Patricia Albers from Bristol about projects that are, in the first case, has started and in the other case is going to start. So Healthy Places, Healthy Planet combines concern about health and place, and of course environmental sustainability and environmental issues. So that's the two things that the program covers. Around about this time last year, we had a series of workshops with researchers, practitioners, and the public, and we wanted to scope out the areas of interest and concern that could fall into the program. And one of the big sort of take-home messages of which we developed our challenge around really fits in, I think, with what we've already heard today, which was this idea that being healthy and living sustainably should not be a privilege. And in particular, the public people we spoke to felt that it was a privilege. There were lots of barriers and difficulties to living a healthy and sustainable life that felt outside of individual control, and that applies to everybody. But in particular, people felt that people with less resource and other kinds of disadvantages felt those barriers to a greater degree. And they mentioned quite a few different themes, of which some are listed here. Things like, you know, the cost of living a healthy, sustainable life, matched against low incomes and low pay, and also more generally difficult working conditions. The way unhealthy and unsustainable products are advertised. And then there's things that are again kind of outside the individual's immediate control anyway, which is things like pollution and unsustainable practices outside people's control, poor regulation and underinvestment in services that might impact on sustainability and health, discrimination, barriers to collective and community action, and other kind of external factors. And people mentioned at the time things such as the war in Ukraine, Brexit, COVID, inflation. So we wanted to put together a program aimed that would encourage people to produce evidence that would help move beyond the problem space and into the solution space for these issues. So as a main aim, we wanted to generate robust evidence to support policy practice and community activities aimed at improving population health, and health and environmental equity and environmental sustainability. And basically our objectives revolve around encouraging our colleagues to collaboratively put together some evaluations of interventions that can help improve environmental sustainability and health with an equity focus and often a co-production and systems focus. So those are my 3 slides.
Thank you. Yeah, so just to then take that forward, so graphically we envisioned our program to look like this. So an integration of Healthy Places and Healthy Planet, which were originally 2 programs, to bring that together with some nice overlap. We have a specific interest in place-based levers and sustainability, and we asked people to think about projects in those areas. And within that, we have the quite broad idea of looking at harmful exposure, sustainable practices, workplace health, and harmful commodities with as an overarching idea of what we wanted to look at, with equity at the start of, or at the center of it all. So we took that forward, and what I now understand is a very old-fashioned way. After the last presentation, we asked for project proposals, and then had a sometimes quite painful process of a year in which we reduced all the ideas that came from all the SPHR researchers, which was, just to give you an idea, it's just over 70 initial projects, and we dwindled that down in various steps to what we have now. And our project is indeed a traditional project, and we've come up with a program of 5 projects for what's the first round of our program. And to give you an overview of these, so conceptualizing local systems of consumption that produce Inequalities in the Nighttime Economy is a project already started and is led by Katie from Sheffield, and she'll be presenting about that a bit more after my short talk. And then the 4 other projects that are about to start deal with community-led interventions to maximize health and well-being of climate change adaptation, led by Exeter with various partners. The evaluation of active and sustainable travel policies in structurally disempowered rural communities, led by Exeter. Effects and mechanisms of traffic restriction schemes outside of schools, led by Cambridge. And finally, the understanding the impact of mandatory energy calorie labelling in out-of-home environments in England, led by London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and lots of collaborators from other SPHR institutes. What that looks like in practice for our program is as I mentioned, the first project of the Nighttime Economy has already started and will run until early 2024. Then the other projects are about to start and will take us into 2025, early 2025. So we'll start to see outputs of these next year and the year after. That doesn't, in contrast to the previous program, we didn't completely map the full 5 years of our program. So after, in 2024, at the end of 2024, we have a second round in which we hope to commission another 2 projects. In between, we have one more project that I didn't mention, which may start a bit later this year, but has to be improved, has to be approved yet, so it's not included here. So we will have new projects coming in near the end of the project to make us to fill our full 5 years of our program. That brings me to the little bit that I have to say. We thought it would be interesting for you to have a closer look at 2 of our projects, the one that already started first, and then after that one of the more environmental and sustainability projects, which will be presented by Patricia Albers. But first, I'll hand over to Katie, who will present Inequalities in the Nighttime Economy.
Hello, everybody. After an early start from Sheffield, I definitely need my notes. And thank you for the chance to speak about our project, Inequalities in the Nighttime Economy. I'm trying to use this shorter title rather than the convoluted one that Frank showed. This is our research team. We're based across Sheffield, Bristol, and the London School of Hygiene. We're from 8 different disciplinary backgrounds, but I think we're managing to communicate effectively despite that. But it's been really nice forming this new team. What unites us is our shared interest in the role of commercial practices in place-based health inequalities. So the starting point for the research is that products sold in the nighttime economy cause more harm in disadvantaged places. Alcohol in particular causes greater acute, long-term and second-hand harm. And alcohol is connected, of course, to a range of other products sold and consumed in the nighttime economy, notably high-fat, salt-sugar foods, gambling products, and tobacco. And those products, in combination with alcohol and separately, cause more harm in disadvantaged places. And as the second column points to here, what's important is that the explanations for unequal harms overlap those different products. So, for example, there are unequal levels of exposure to advertising of these products, shaping the amount and type of consumption. And there are also unequal resources within communities to manage the harm from these products. So, for example, financial resources to buy alternative, healthier products or to support quit attempts. And research also shows that the explanations, these overlapping mechanisms for inequality, aren't easily articulated by people, even people with a role in the nighttime economy in managing this. So, on that basis, the premise of our study is that a framework depicting the pathways to unequal harm can support collective advocacy for change at a local area. So we're going to produce with stakeholders a framework that shows these pathways, showing how inequalities develop from products sold in the nighttime economy. We'll do that through 2 steps. Firstly, looking at literature already published on this topic, and secondly, by testing the accuracy of the framework that we produce through fieldwork in 2 local sites. We're taking a collaborative approach to reflect the importance of stakeholder perspectives in the framework. And we've built a core team of 13 stakeholders from local and national government who have expertise in managing the nighttime economy and harm from the products that I've mentioned. And we've engaged a group of over 50 others to advise on separate elements of the project. So I've made that sound very smooth, but as Steph described, there's been a huge amount of work involved in building those relationships and understanding how people are working. And there is a desire within that network to share practice in relation to the commercial determinants of health. So through our networking, we're facilitating opportunities for that. And I've just tried to indicate here some of the ways in which we're taking a collaborative approach to decision making in the project in terms of the scope, interpreting the literature and designing our field work. And this is a very broad outline of our approach to searching the literature. We'll use researcher and stakeholder knowledge to identify some key texts and take that as a starting point to search for studies that explain unequal harms from our short list of products, starting with alcohol, high-fat salt sugar foods, tobacco and gambling products. And the aim will be to identify theories that are relevant to consumption in the nighttime economy. And we'll collate, evaluate and combine these explanations, and subsequently there'll be an assessment of evidence for the theories that we identify. I've tried to give an indication here of some of the categories that are emerging to explain inequalities from these products. There are a set of explanations, for example, relating to product exposure, including outlet density. Another set related to social norms, for example, that affect the safety of settings in which alcohol is consumed. But ultimately, we'll aim to depict the explanations in a systems map to demonstrate the connections that occur within the space of the nighttime economy. So we're using the idea of the nighttime economy as a way of describing the space in which these practices take place. Through the planned field work that I'll discuss next, the systems map will help us firstly identify how industry influences these processes we're describing, how they influence them locally. And second, it will identify where these processes can most easily be disrupted. So, informed by the literature review, we'll work with our stakeholders to design a participatory mappings process, which is a qualitative approach to unearthing stakeholder perspectives on a topic and bringing together their understanding to produce a shared systems diagram. So in this instance, we're aiming to produce an interpretation of systems of consumption in the nighttime economy that produce inequality. So we'll run this mapping process in 2 localities, 2 contrasting sites that will help us compare the usefulness of the map in places with different population characteristics, differing nighttime economies in terms of their scale and the primary users, and areas where there are differing approaches and interventions to manage the nighttime economy. So just to be clear, the mapping process will be guided by the more general framework that we derive from the literature, and the fieldwork will allow us to depict local systems and explore context in more detail. So I flagged up some of our key sources here, and please do get in touch with questions or further offers to collaborate, I think. Thank you.
Oh, it's already here. So the next presentation is by one of the projects within the environment and sustainable part of our program. It will be done by Patricia Elvis Bristol.
Thanks, Frank. Good morning, everyone. As Frank has just said, I'm Patricia Elbers from the University of Bristol, and I'm presenting this project on behalf of the project team who are unfortunately not able to be here today. I don't have a short title, so it's a long one, but you've heard it before. And we're a collaboration between the University of Exeter, the University of Bristol, Lilac, and Fuse. So just by way of a short introduction, climate change is considered the biggest threat to human health. So I've included this diagram which just kind of shows the pathways and the mechanisms to the health impacts. And at the bottom are some of the health impacts, which include heat-related illness, respiratory illness, and even mental health. Extreme weather events are increasing in the UK, and as a result, the UK government has declared this a priority. And in April of this year, they released the Adverse Weather and Health Plan. And as part of that plan, they identified 4 primary goals, and that's to prevent the increase in years of life lost due to these adverse weather events, to prevent mortality and morbidity due to them, and also to reduce the use of healthcare services during these events. So as we all know, climate change adversely affects the most deprived communities. So in this project, we're going to be evaluating how groups of people within different communities can act to reduce the health consequences of these extreme events, and we're specifically looking at floods, heat waves, and cold waves. So why are we looking at these community actions? Because by looking at them, we can identify any gaps in support or response, which could prevent health burdens, particularly for the most vulnerable people. And often these types of interventions are designed and assessed based on their risk reduction or economic impacts, but they don't often look at the health consequences. Whereas, for example, if you think of nature-based responses, that has a lot of benefits for health too. And then there's a lot of shared learning that can come across from the different interventions. So, for example, in the winter months, there's a lot of heat banks get set up, or warm banks get set up around the UK, and we could potentially take learning from that and apply it to heat waves. So in this project, we're defining community-led action as any action, activity, or response to a weather-related event. So that could be a community spontaneously responding to something that's happened, like a flood, or it could be them preparing for an anticipated risk, like a flood. And it can range from anything like providing skilled services, either to adapt or recover from an event, or it could be specifically supporting the most vulnerable people in the community. So we know that these types of community actions have a lot of success in reducing the risks, but we don't know the breadth or extent of them. And we also don't know particularly what it is about these actions that protect or impact health or are supportive of health. So these are just 2 examples of community-led actions against flooding. The one with the 2 pictures is from Yorkshire and the other is from Devon. The intervention in Yorkshire, they were able to reduce the chance of flooding from 25% to less than 4% in any 1 year. So both of these examples are examples of social learning between community members, researchers, local government, and other agencies, which could be charities. These initiatives are community-centered, and they encourage the participation of as many people as possible, and they draw from many local sources of information. So, for example, in the Yorkshire example, they drew from historical learnings that they found in historical records of what monks did centuries ago. From there, they then create a local approach to the risk, in this case was flooding. So with the Devon example, they created this resilience group that then worked with the town council to develop an emergency plan. And in that emergency plan, they planned to provide support, emergency and emotional, to the community. But they also specifically planned for vulnerable groups, and that included people with disabilities or even people who didn't have access to the internet. So the aim of our study is to evaluate how places and populations can be made healthier through these community-led actions. And we've got 3 main objectives. The first one is to explore the range of these community-led actions and to look at how they interrelate. And the second is to explore how these community-led actions support health and well-being, and how that can be improved going forward in the future. And the final objective is looking at how systemic inequalities are being addressed by and also affect the experiences of people and to do with these community actions. So this is a 2-year project with the hope of extending it to a 4-year project. So in here I'm just talking about the first 2 years. But in the first 2 years we'd aim to evaluate these community-led actions, and in the following 2 years it would be to create a community-led action. So in these 2 years, like I said, that's what I'm focusing on now. There's 2 work packages. So in work package 1, we're firstly going to be doing a review of all of these actions. That's going to be a scientific review, but also working really closely with stakeholders. And during that process of working with stakeholders, when we'll focus on exploring the inequalities and how they're shaping the experiences, which links to the 3rd objective. In work package 2, we're going to do an in-depth case studies. So we'll select a community-led intervention for flooding, heat wave, and cold waves. And we'll use a realist approach to evaluate these. And in order to do that, we'll do in-depth interviews, workshops, document reviews, and also a retrospective evaluation of the effectiveness and any barriers they encountered. And in the final activity, we'll then bring together all of the learning from both work packages and create a set of principles that we'll then use to, in the next following 2 years, hopefully create a community-led action. Thank you very much. So if you've got any questions.
Right, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed both of these taster projects. I can guarantee that the other 3 are equally interesting and exciting. We're happy to take any questions, and my function hopefully is primarily to ping them on to one of the other 3. So.
Hi, thanks for really interesting research and presentations. My question was actually about the climate change work. So it was reminding me of some work that was done a few years ago at Lancaster looking at the impacts of flooding. And one of the key things they found around mental health was the effects on that were much longer term in terms of that kind of period of longer term recovery. So while that kind of immediate period was important, it was also that kind of the ongoing effects that might be kind of years or months or years. So I wondered if you were kind of looking at the spectrum of that kind of response phase to environmental crisis, or are you just focusing on a particular phase?
Can you hear me? Yeah, I think we would look at the whole spectrum to a degree, to as much as we could. We're aware that, like, obviously flooding has got long-term impacts, and recovering from extreme events has got long-term impacts. So I think in some of the community-led action, there would be stuff about recovery. So it would be about supporting people long-term after floods or events or things like that. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, Ashley.
Thanks, Frank. I wanted to ask about the project, the nighttime economy, and in any of the conversations, and maybe it's a little bit early on this, and I don't know, Lorna might have a perspective, but I wondered whether the advantages, the financial advantages of the nighttime economy are coming up in terms of the value of that to the city councils or the town councils or whatever, in terms of, it's an important part of their maintaining their businesses and business rates and all of those aspects, as well as the social aspects of the town. So I wondered if anything from that had arisen from conversations.
So as a project team, we've certainly been talking about that, and we're keen to acknowledge that in some way. It is an important part of the story, given that public health colleagues talked to us about how difficult it is to raise the issues locally with people, others in local government who have other responsibilities, more focused on economic development. So it hasn't been central to our discussion with local government partners, and I'm also concerned about the ability of our framework to encompass positive health effects as well as negative health effects, but it will certainly be developed within an understanding of that, if that is sufficient to answer your question.
We all sometimes hear about alternatives in the nighttime economy that aren't necessarily unhealthy. And it's one of those where we find that it's an interesting idea and people talk about it, and there may be even a few examples, but how many examples and how widespread and have they been shown to work is an interesting one. But I think that idea of having a nighttime economy that isn't just there to get out your face, basically.
Just very briefly, I would just add to that from a local authority perspective, there is definitely a tension in terms of economic priorities versus public health priorities, and I suppose that's why we're trying to really focus the narrative on kind of the public health priorities are everyone's priorities. They're not just the annoying public health team. It's us translating that into issues around community safety, around the cost of litter pickups and collections, very practical pressures for the local authority that actually are our biggest levers, and again, not necessarily articulating the health harms because that's longer term, but if we can make it on what are the things that actually councillors, cabinet, that put budgetary pressures on local authorities, that's when we can see opportunities for action in kind of joint ownership of those opportunities. Yeah.
Thank you. Is there time for one more question? Yeah, the last one.
Very, very quick.
I don't know if it's quick or not, but it's on the climate change project, which looks really super. But I was just wondering, you mentioned health inequalities, and I wondered how you were conceptualising them. You know, what types of inequality are either you or the groups looking at? Because I appreciate it's a two-way thing. Thanks.
Sorry, thinking about it.
We can always chat afterwards.
It sounds like quite a big question, and maybe we should do that after, outside of this.
I'll catch you at coffee. We can have a nice chat.
Sounds good.
So thank you very much. I think we close this bit. Just to say, if you want to discuss any of this program with us, you can always talk or email Matt or me. But probably if you want a useful answer, it's better to talk to Mirela or Cheryl, who know all of this, or to Kat if it's to do with public involvement and engagement. Thank you.